Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, June 11th, 2021. How are you feeling today? Do you like democracy? Too bad. We're all out. You're going to have to go get some at the store if you want some more. What a day. Well, we should find no difficulty in filling our 2 hours today. We might even find some difficulty in keeping our regular guests at bay, although they may be tweeting up a storm and enjoying debating today's events online that way, as opposed to on the radio. But I don't know. I have this strange feeling we could get a random call or two. But if not, like I said, plenty of for us to cover today. Where do you want to begin with? Okay, never mind. I think you know where we're going with all this. First of all, I guess let's get the pleasantries out of the way. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. Bill's telling this all the way from Portland, Maine, in as pleasant a fashion as possible. Sure, things may seem crappy. He's picking up on this as well, but Kagro X, me, David Waldman, reminds you that at least we've got our normal weekends back again. Damn it, that counts for something, and it is. It is something. It does count for something. And what can I tell you? You're going to enjoy having the weekend off to decompress, but you'll probably be talking about some of these rather troubling stories over the weekend. And perhaps we can do you a service in informing you on some of what's happening, perhaps giving you a few starter takes of your own, perhaps, if you find yourself in discussion of the heavier subjects over the weekend. And maybe, just maybe, find some time to introduce a few that have been circulating on the internet, but that we have not had a chance to discuss at some point, which are, I would say, major undercurrents of events in the news. Some events that really haven't broken through, perhaps, in your news, but that are, no doubt, affecting your world regardless. There's nothing you can do to stop them, is basically what I'm trying to tell you. All right, let's see. I suppose we could just dive right in by visiting Pocket, because you know the top stories of the day are there. Where do we start with this one? Should we start from the beginning with the initial report? All right. I suppose that's probably the best place to start, although events have evolved beyond there by now, of course, because this story broke yesterday afternoon. I don't know what the date line on this thing is. Yeah. Well, actually, yesterday morning, I suppose. But, oh, no, I'm sorry. It was updated. I hate when they do this. So now the date line was published yesterday, but I don't know what time, and that doesn't seem like a very important thing. So when they put the timestamp on it, it's the latest update. It's updated this morning. Never mind. The story is from the New York Times. Hunting leaks. Trump officials focused on Democrats in Congress. The Justice Department seized records from Apple for metadata of House Intelligence Committee members. And who cares about the metadata of Intelligence Committee members? That seems like it should be free for all, don't you think? But it didn't stop there, of course. It was House Intelligence Committee members, Democratic members only, so far as we know, but also their aides and family members. Wow. Well, okay, let's dive in. Katie Benner, Nick Fandos, Mike Schmidt, Adam Goldman teaming up for this one. A 4-name byline means serious, I guess. I don't know. Over at the New York Times. Maybe not. At any rate, as the Justice Department investigated who was behind leaks of classified information early in the Trump administration, it took a highly unusual step. Yes, it did. Prosecutors subpoenaed Apple for data from the accounts of at least 2 Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee, aides and family members. One was a minor, probably not on the House Intelligence Committee. It was elsewhere. You see, in the homestead, perhaps, of one of the members of the Intelligence Committee. And before we even, start down that path, I don't know whether they even try to justify the thing at any point. But, and by the way, what makes me think we might hear, say, from Armando on something like this today is, of course, we heard from him all day on Twitter about it. And, yes, he was pointing out, it'll be interesting and fascinating to hear. Can't wait to hear how the Merrick Garland Justice Department justifies defending this practice because of some sort of institutionalism. I mean, they have not done that yet. It is tongue-in-cheek, but, it's on the horizon, or certainly could be. How do they end up, by the way, scooping up the metadata for communications for a minor family member of one of the, I don't know whether it was a staffer or member on the Intelligence Committee. I'm sure the story will tell us that much. And of course, I mean, I can understand once you, if you were legitimately involved in such an investigation, and I don't know how legitimate this is, it's certainly, I'm sure, dressed up in the trappings of legitimacy, that is to say, done under color of law. But just because you have a suit and tie doesn't mean you're actually following the law when you order these things. But I'm sure they were thinking, oh, that clever, I would guess, Adam Schiff might be using one of his family members' computers or even one of his kids' computers to evade detection in leaking all of this information. So we got to seize that too. It's not unreasonable in its motivation. It's just that the leak investigation probably wrongly directed and should have drawn the line before getting to that. Once you blow past the line of, yes, we'll seize the communications and communications metadata of members of Congress of the opposition party, and maybe nobody else. Once you get past that, you say, well, we might as well do a thorough job of it, I suppose, and seize everybody's computers. But maybe they use their neighbors' computers. I don't know. Let's seize those too. At what point do you not? So at any of these points, you could have stopped and said, we're on the wrong side of the line here. Anyway, let's continue on. All told, the records of at least a dozen people tied to the committee were seized in 2017 and early 2018, including those of Representative Adam Schiff of California, then the panel's top Democrat, and now its chairman, that is to say, still its top Democrat, according to committee officials and two other people briefed on the inquiry. Representative Eric Swalwell of California said in an interview on Thursday night that he had also been notified that his data had been subpoenaed. Prosecutors, under the beleaguered Attorney General, that point Jeff Sessions, were hunting for the sources behind news media reports about contacts between Trump associates and Russia. In other words, Trump associates had been more or less caught red-handed. Well, not red-handed, but were caught after the fact in their contacts with Russia. Those contacts were problematic. The Trump administration was angry that they had been caught and wanted to know who caught them so that they might be able to come up with a way to punish them for catching them, is essentially what was going on here. Ultimately, the data and other evidence did not tie the committee to the leaks. They figured the cheapest and easiest and most direct way of both undermining the impact of being found out for having contacts with Russia and punishing their enemies would be to find evidence that they had leaked the information to the press and then accuse them of violating national security standards by leaking this sort of classified information to the press. And not only that, but of course saying, well, this was a motivated step. They were doing this because they were partisans and so desperate to tar the Trump administration and the Trump campaign with wrongdoing that they committed wrongdoing themselves, and everybody's doing wrong and no one can be trusted, and the basic nihilistic viewpoint. And maybe it's all fake news anyway, but at any rate, there are criminals on both sides. You can't trust anybody. At least we want to make America great again, and they don't, so therefore listen to us. Only guess what? They searched and searched and searched, broke every barrier in their path, every norm, every rule, possibly some laws on the way, and found nothing. That's so strange. Just like this election was stolen by massive voter fraud, and they searched and quote-unquote audited again and called secretaries of state of individual states and begged them to quote-unquote find votes for them, and vowed to arrest everyone and linked everything to the idea that massive voter fraud was going on, and were unable to find any of it, at least no statistically significant fraud. And when they did find statistically insignificant fraud, it was Trump voters casting illegal ballots for Trump. But whatever. soldier on. So ultimately, the data and other evidence did not tie the committee to the leaks, and investigators debated whether they had hit a dead end, and some even discussed closing the inquiry. But I guess they were overruled, so they just didn't do that. All right, let's see. On this subject, before we continue, I happen to note Justice's note to me here saying, so hey, I guess this means we'll have to subpoena Barron's phones because Trump probably used it to talk to Vlad to circumvent the NSA. I guess that's a thought. And I don't know, a bad one, but validated by the previous administration. So therefore it's precedent. And, just being an institutionalist, I have to agree and approve the subpoena for Barron's phones. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to preserve institutional integrity here. That's what I'll say. All right. Anyway, so here we were with some people actually saying, hey, now that we've seized everyone's computers, or rather everyone's metadata from Apple, and found nothing, maybe we were wrong. Maybe we should end the inquiry. No, says William Barr, now reviving languishing leak investigations after he became Attorney General a year later. A year later. He moved a trusted prosecutor from New Jersey with little relevant experience to Maine Justice down in D.C. to work on the Schiff-related case and about half a dozen others, according to 3 people with knowledge of his work who did not want to be identified discussing federal investigations, particularly potentially illegal and unconstitutional ones. The zeal in the Trump administration's efforts to hunt leakers led to the extraordinary step of subpoenaing communications metadata from members of Congress, a nearly unheard of move. It's not done. It's unheard of. It would be breaking norms. But go ahead and do it. Wow, what a bold maverick. He cuts his own path as president of the United States. He threw out the rule book, right? That, of course, was the current coverage. The concurrent coverage. All right. Well, anyway, yes, a nearly unheard of move outside of corruption investigations. In other words, you got the William Jefferson types who they suspect of some active corruption. And yeah, sometimes you have to investigate members of Congress for wrongdoing. It's stuff that's ordinarily otherwise either protected by speech and debate clause or of questionable value as a legal violation that would normally have the Justice Department following the book. Well, we have to because it's a Justice Department norm to continue prosecuting these cases and have continuity in the Justice Department position as between administrations to show that we're not merely politically motivated in our prosecutions. Okay, right. So we follow the rule book. For instance, Mueller and his investigation says, well, we won't indict the sitting president. There's no law against it. There's nothing in the Constitution that says we can't do it directly, but that's Justice Department norms. We don't do that. We have reasons for it. There's a whole memo about it, et cetera, and it's just something that's just not done. Well, what about seizing metadata from communications of members of Congress who aren't directly suspected of any corruption or really of any jeopardizing of national security? Well, in that case, yeah, sure, let's just throw out that rule book because I would like to be able to tell the boss that we nailed Schiff. So let's just do that. All right. Should we wait? I mean, at that point, I wonder why they waited for evidence. Why don't they just generate their own evidence and say, all right, they're guilty of this instead. But I don't know. Somehow that's beyond the pale for them. They feared they'd get caught. Well, they're getting caught for this now instead. All right. Now, as we were saying, while Justice Department leak investigations are routine, current and former congressional officials familiar with the inquiry said they could not recall an instance in which the records of lawmakers had been seized as part of one. Moreover, just as it did in investigating news organizations, the Justice Department secured a gag order on Apple that expired this year. That's why we know about it now, according to a person familiar with the inquiry. So lawmakers did not know they were being investigated until Apple informed them last month. Prosecutors also eventually secured subpoenas for reporters' records to try to identify their confidential sources, a move that department policy allows only after all other avenues of inquiry are exhausted. The subpoenas remained secret until the Justice Department disclosed them in recent weeks to the news organizations, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and CNN, revelations that set off criticism that the government was intruding on press freedoms. It is. That's why. The gag orders and record seizures show how aggressively the Trump administration pursued the inquiries while Mr. Trump declared war on the news media and perceived enemies, whom he routinely accused of disclosing damaging information about him, according to including Mr. Schiff and James Comey, former FBI director, whom prosecutors focused on in the leak inquiry involving Times records. And guess what? They didn't catch him either. Notwithstanding whether there was sufficient predication for the leak investigation itself, including family members and minor children, strikes me as extremely aggressive, said David Laufman, a former Justice Department official who worked on leak investigations. In combination with former President Trump's unmistakable vendetta against Congressman Schiff, it raises serious questions about whether the manner in which this investigation was conducted was influenced by political considerations rather than purely legal ones. It's a good question. It's the question that Kamala Harris asked Barr at his confirmation, or rather not at the confirmation, at oversight hearings. Have you ever been asked to initiate an investigation of anyone, say by, I don't know, one of the very few people, maybe a handful of people who could be considered your boss? Nah, I don't. I don't know. It's a hard question. I believe the answer is actually yes, and now we know why and which investigations we're talking about. A Justice Department spokesman declined to comment, as did Mr. Barr and a representative from Apple. Tim Apple wouldn't say anything. As the years wore on, some officials argued in meetings that charges were becoming less realistic. I mean, we've been looking for these for years. We have never found it. Well, that, according to former Justice Department officials, they lacked strong evidence, or any, really, and a jury might not care about information reported years earlier. The Trump administration also declassified some of that same information, making it harder for prosecutors to argue that publishing it had harmed the United States. And the president's attacks on Mr. Schiff and Mr. Comey would allow defense lawyers to argue that any charges were actually attempts to wield the power of law enforcement against Mr. Trump's enemies. But Barr directed prosecutors to continue investigating, contending that the Justice Department's National Security Division had allowed the cases to languish. According to 3 people briefed on the cases, some cases had nothing to do with leaks about Mr. Trump and involved sensitive national security information, one of the people said, but Mr. Barr's overall view of the leaks led some people in the department to eventually see the inquiries as politically motivated. Mr. Schiff called the subpoenas for data on committee members and staff another example of Trump using the Justice Department as a cudgel against his political opponents and members of the media. It is increasingly apparent that those demands did not fall on deaf ears, Mr. Schiff said in a statement. The politicization of the department and the attacks on the rule of law are among the most dangerous assaults on our democracy carried out by the former president. And this is a former president who also carried out an armed coup on the Congress while they were counting the electoral votes. So, you know, it's actually a fairly high bar, one of the few high bars in the Trump administration. He said the department informed him in May that the investigation into his committee was closed, but he called on its independent inspector general, those guys again, to investigate the leak case and others that suggest the weaponization of law enforcement, an appeal joined by Speaker Nancy Pelosi. And we're down to appeals. That's great. Please, Inspector General, investigate these things. I don't know who the Inspector General at DOJ is at the moment, but I guess stand by to find out how important fencing contractors were in all of this. We weren't eavesdropping on members of Congress. We weren't seizing their communications materials. We were just getting ready to set up a fence around their telephones. I have nothing, I don't know. All right, well, let's see. Let's continue on just to get our background straight here. Soon after Trump took office in 2017, press reports based on sensitive or classified intelligence threw the White House into chaos. They detailed conversations between the Russian ambassador to the United States at the time and Trump's top aides, the president's pressuring of the FBI, and other matters related to the Russia investigation. Which, if the shoe were on the other foot, Trump would insist the American people had a right to know. But now it's about him, so they don't. The White House was adamant that the sources be found and prosecuted. By the way, very good job at getting stuff done, dotard. No one got prosecuted for that. And the Justice Department began a broad look at national security officials from the Obama administration, according to 5 people briefed on the inquiry. And, by the time the whole history of this is written, 1, we'll probably have found out that the leak was coming from Trump administration officials. And 2, that the accusations against Democrats were, once again, projection to cover their tracks. Anyway, that's just speculation. What's here in the article? While most officials were ruled out, investigators opened cases that focused on Comey and his deputy, Andrew McCabe, the People said. Prosecutors also began to scrutinize the House Intelligence Committee, including Schiff, as a potential source of the leaks. As the House's chief intelligence oversight body, the committee has regular access to sensitive government secrets. By the way, so far ignored in all of this, the majority of the members of the Intelligence Committee, including its then chairman, Devin Nunes, who were Republicans. And in fact, Devin Nunes, who at the time considered himself something of an international super spy and was in fact leaking intelligence that the committee had in its possession to the White House so that the White House could prepare itself to defend against the charges that the Trump administration and Trump campaign had been colluding with the Russians. So he was taking actual national security information about the Russia investigation, telling the White House, but the White House, by virtue of having, essentially rigged the Electoral College for a year previous, was in the position of being allowed to wear that suit and tie that the press mistakes for color of law, and just says, well, he's entitled to having this information. Besides which, the president, we've learned from the previous Republican administration, and I did say they were just going to pick up and take things a little bit further the next time a Republican was in office. The previous Republican administration, of course, famous for championing the idea that the president is incapable of leaking classified information because if he does leak it, he can simply declare unilaterally that, well, it's not leaked, it's now declassified. You can't leak declassified information, and there's no such thing as information I can't declare instantaneously or even retroactively to be declassified. So I can say whatever I want and leak whatever I want and tell anybody any information I want, and that's fine because, I'm not crazy. I'm not going to just make stuff up or declassify stuff that's really, really dangerous to the interests of the United States just to score political points. But I'd look out if I hired a crazy, idiot reality television host as president, because you never know what a guy like that's going to do. But thankfully, that'll never happen because America's a fair and balanced place. I mean, don't laugh. I mean, that's not just George Bush believing that. Oh, Barack Obama believed that. So, whatever. Anyway, where were we with this? Yes, right. So they were investigating a bunch of Democrats on the committee and no Republicans, even though Republicans were at the time actively leaking intelligence information. It's just it was the good kind of leak, according to the Trump administration, the kind of information we wanted to know, and he gave us the good stuff. Now, it was all garbage, but that's what happened. Justice Department National Security Division officials briefed the Deputy Attorney General's office nearly every other week on the investigations, 3 former department officials said. In 2017 and 18, a grand jury subpoenaed Apple and another internet service provider for the records of the people associated with the Intelligence Committee. They learned about most of the subpoenas last month when Apple informed them that their records had been shared, but did not detail the extent of the request, committee officials said. A second service provider had notified one member of the committee's staff about such a request last year. I don't know why. The gag order was shorter for them. It was not clear why family members or children were involved, but I think we can all guess that. But the investigators could have sought the accounts because they were linked or on the theory that parents were using their children's phones or computers to hide contacts with journalists. There do not appear to have been similar grand jury subpoenas for records of members or staff of the Senate Intelligence Committee, that is, according to another official. familiar with the matter. A spokesman for Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee did not respond to a question about whether they were issued subpoenas. Justice Department has declined to tell Democrats on the committee whether any Republicans were investigated, because institutionalism. Apple turned over only metadata and account information, not photos, emails, or other content, according to the person familiar with the inquiry. After the records provided no proof of leaks, prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington discussed ending that piece of their investigation, but Barr's decision to bring in an outside prosecutor helped keep the case alive. A CNN report in August of 2019 about another leak investigation said prosecutors did not recommend to their superiors that they charge Comey over memos that he wrote and shared about his interactions with Trump, which were not ultimately found to contain classified information, though members of the Intelligence Committee and others in the administration kept insinuating that that was exactly what they contained. They did not. Barr was wary of how Trump would react, though, right? That we found no evidence, but my real fear is, will Trump yell at me when I tell him this? Indeed, Trump berated the Attorney General, who defended the department, because institutionalism, telling the president that there was no case against Mr. Comey to be made. But an investigation remained open into whether Comey had leaked other classified information about Russia. So we can still try and prosecute him, but the problem is, Mr. President, we just can't make the case against him. We have no evidence. Evidence. You just go and you charge him, and if it gets thrown out in court, you replace the judges. That's all. What's wrong with you people? Why are you waiting? I don't even wait. I just kiss the judges. I'm like a magnet. How do they work? Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I think we kind of have to continue because it's a pretty big story, and we'll continue on here where we stopped. Let's see. Right. Oh, yes, right. They had investigated Comey as well, found no evidence. That Trump blew up at Barr and said, keep looking, essentially. So they kept the investigation open. Now, some revived cases. That comes up next. In February of 2020, Barr placed the prosecutor from New Jersey, Osmar Benvenuto, into the National Security Division. Osmar Benvenuto. Okay. His background was in gang and healthcare fraud prosecutions. That is an odd mix, but, I bet there's a nexus there, actually. Anyway, through a Justice Department spokesperson, Mr. Benvenuto declined comment. Benvenuto's appointment was in keeping with Barr's desire to keep matters of great interest to the White House in the hands of a small circle of trusted aides and officials. With Benvenuto involved in the leak inquiries, the FBI questioned Michael Bahar, I don't know how you would pronounce this, Bahar. He's a former House Intelligence Committee staff member who had gone into private practice in May of 2017. The interview, conducted in late spring of 2020, it's a long time, 3 years later, did not yield evidence that led to charges. Wild. Prosecutors also redoubled efforts to find out who had leaked material related to Michael Flynn. It's probably Michael Flynn, Mr. Trump's first national security advisor and notorious spy. Details about conversations he had had in late 2016 with the Russian ambassador at the time, Sergei Kislyak, appeared in news reports in early 2017 and eventually helped prompt both his ouster and federal charges against him. The discussions had also been considered highly classified because the FBI had used a court-authorized secret wiretap of Kislyak to monitor them. And I mean, you're not wiretapping the Russian ambassador all the time? Okay. But John Ratcliffe, remember that guy? Then, at the time, Director of National Intelligence and a close ally of Mr. Trump's, seemed to damage the leak inquiry, what a dummy, in May of 2020 when he declassified transcripts of the calls. The authorized disclosure would have made it more difficult for prosecutors to argue that the news stories had hurt national security. Separately, one of the prosecutors whom Barr had directed to re-examine the FBI's criminal case against Flynn interviewed at least one law enforcement official in the leak investigation after the transcripts were declassified, a move that a person familiar with the matter labeled politically fraught, right? In other words, we're interviewing you to find out whether you leaked the information, but the information has already been declassified. There's no case against me anymore. Yes, but I want to worry you. Ah, I see. Now we're getting somewhere. The bi-weekly updates on the leak investigations between top officials continued. Julie Edelstein, the Deputy Chief of Counterintelligence and Export Control, and Matt Blue, the head of the department's counterterrorism section, briefed John Demers, the head of the National Security Division, and Seth Ducharme, an official in the Deputy Attorney General's office, on their progress. Benvenuto was involved in briefings with Barr. Demers, Edelstein, Blue, and Benvenuto are still at the Justice Department, in case you were wondering. Their continued presence and leadership roles would seem to ensure that Mr. Biden's appointees, including Attorney General Merrick Garland, would have a full understanding of the investigations. I see. And then I guess come around to the conclusion that, well, because institutionalism, they must continue, or something like that. Very interesting. So that's our background. There's more to the story, of course. There have been further developments, both people just talking about things on the internet, like our good friend Hunter from Daily Kos tweeting yesterday. If I'm understanding this right, during the period when Devin Nunes was stovepiping Russian disinformation through his office to protect Russian espionage operations and discredit American intelligence, Barr's Justice Department was investigating the families of committee Democrats. I see. Yeah. It's pretty interesting. Right, and of course, he says, continue to be in awe of just how little interest lawmakers seem to have in holding anyone to account for the grotesque, unbelievable executive branch corruption. Boy, are they afraid of the executive branch over there. I gotta tell you, that's a continuing problem. All right, a further update on the story reported last night. By now, of course, old news. Trump DOJ seized data from House Democrats in leak probe, reported this time by the Associated Press, which I guess added the angle by evening that Jewish members of Congress were saying they wanted an investigation into this stuff. And couldn't we please sort of kind of maybe figure out who did it, and then I guess appoint a bipartisan, evenly divided commission later to not subpoena anyone about those subpoenas and come to the conclusion that something, and we needed to cut spending somehow. I don't even know where that comes from, but that's what super committees tend to do. And I don't know, all of a sudden Social Security was eliminated. I don't know how it happened. Anyway, yeah. So I think the AP angle here was just basically the addition of the members of Congress reacting to it and saying why we ought to have an investigation. There's Nancy Pelosi in there. These actions appear to be yet another egregious assault on our democracy. The news about the politicization of the Trump administration Justice Department is harrowing, she said. Almost like you would say, some percentage more harrowing than the news of the politicization of the Justice Department under the George W. Bush administration. The sort of thing that might lead someone, say, visiting the White House to discuss the continuum of criminal, quote-unquote, governance by Republican administrations since Nixon, and since they'd been advised in the Nixon days by Cheney. who was then later Vice President of the United States, and now has a daughter, I understand, is in politics somewhere and celebrated as a hero in some circles. But yeah, it might motivate you to tell an incoming Democratic president sandwiched in between Republican administrations, you have a special duty at this point to recognize the pattern, which has been consistent from Nixon and Ford. We just combined them into one. Nixon to Reagan to the first Bush to the second Bush. All indications are that this will simply be picked up and continued and made worse by the next Republican administration, because they view this as their prerogative as president. This is part of what they view as part and parcel of presidential powers. This is properly being done because they are wearing the correct suit and tie and occupy the correct office. If you say, well, that's over and it won't happen again because George W. Bush is gone and term limited and all sorts of things, you are an idiot on that score, and you will find yourself severely burned very quickly when the next Republican administration is elected, or should I say, quote unquote, elected. Two Republican administrations in a row elected by minorities, losing the popular vote, squeaking by in the electoral vote, through no fault of their own, sure, and just making things worse and worse as they go on. And there's no markers on the trail because you were busy looking forward, not backward. Now, okay, we did well and got some health care out of that. That was a good thing. It may, I guess, have been the case that the passage, well, you know what? No, it isn't. What am I saying? I was going to say, oh, well, maybe passage of the bill was in fact jeopardized by, as you said, it would be jeopardized by these sort of partisan fights would rob us of our ability to find people to come together in good faith in the middle and compromise. And of course, the plan got no Republican votes. It was attacked unanimously by Republicans and required the use of reconciliation just to jam the goddamn thing through in final form. And what do you know? So we gave up on our ability to lay down some markers, at least, to be able to point to in what became the Trump administration. Granted, we didn't know that's who it was going to be, but it didn't matter. It was going to be anyone because that's the way Republicans govern. That was my point. But, I'm an idiot blogger and blah, blah, blah. Plus, by the way, unrevealed detail in all of this, I was wearing a tan suit at the time. I don't think I told anybody that until just the other day. I tweeted it out. I realized, oh, yeah, it was hot as blazes, and I had to get dressed in a suit to go to the White House. And, I don't know, what was it, late May, I guess, and it was already steaming hot in Washington, and I wore a tan poplin suit so as to, maybe minimize the torture of the heat as I was driving in and waiting around, and, they don't cool the place that well, the White House. It's an old building. Anyway, point is, wore a tan suit, right? So how could I be trusted? It was right, but I was wearing a tan suit. It's my own fault. I should have seen that coming. All right, let's see. There are a couple other developments in this, and I'll just read here from NBC's first read stuff, which ordinarily Greg would be here to tell us all that, but not on a Friday, you see. So this is supposed to be the latest follow-up on all this. The new bombshell report about Trump's DOJ is all part, get this, all part of a familiar pattern. Yes, it's a pattern. Who is the genius that came up with identifying this pattern? It wasn't me, I'll tell you that. People knew this long before I did and said anything about it, but whatever, it's my show. So here I go. The new bombshell is part of a familiar pattern. What pattern is it that they see? First read will tell you, and it doesn't matter. Why I should be in the habit now. Never read what appears to be the subtitle on first read. It doesn't have anything to do with the headline. Usually there's an extra explainer in the subheader here. The way first read works is headline, important news, and then subheader, first read is an awesome source for news because we're super smart and we tell you stuff that you need to know. All right, but that's called, we're a newspaper, and that's why you're, okay. Frustrating. Anyway, now I've wasted more time. And anyway, if you want to diminish the importance of what they have to say even further, you will read The Byline by Chuck Todd and also Mark Murray and Carrie Dan. But, yeah, the big downer is Chuck Todd on the top. Anyway, okay. Even they lost Chuck Todd. He thinks it's a bombshell until Sunday, at which point the border will be the bombshell somehow when he's on television. All right. On Thursday night, the New York Times published a kind of jaw-dropping story that used to come out weekly and sometimes even daily during the Trump era, and yet they said that it was somehow good for Trump and whatever. Okay, the former president's Justice Department, the Times reports, subpoenaed the phone records of at least 2 Democratic congressmen, including records from family members and 1 minor, all in an effort to hunt for the sources behind news reports of Trump associate contacts with Russia. It violates, I think, the separation of powers. Yes, it does. You don't have to think too hard about that. But it also makes the Department of Justice a fully owned subsidiary of the president's personal legal interests. Adam Schiff, one of the targets of the reported subpoenas, told MSNBC's Rachel Maddow last night. And it's not the first time we've learned how the former president, just one of them, tried to use or abuse his powers, even if those efforts never came to fruition. And let me tell you, the hallmark of a Trump administration caper is that it never comes to fruition, but that's okay. It's still prosecutable, unless, of course, you're following rules, in which case, no, it's not. Remember when he asked Ukraine's president to look into dirt on Joe Biden and his son? Do you? Does anybody? I don't know. That's a pretty deep insight, Chuck. Keep going. And, of course, then they put in parentheses, in case you didn't remember that the president asked Ukraine's president for this. He has this parenthetical quote from Trump. There's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution. And a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the attorney general would be great, unquote. And of course, what do you know? What a strange thing to be asking of an attorney general. Or what about when he asked the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, to find him the votes needed to overturn the presidential election results in that state? All I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes. I mean, talk about a confession. All right, well, anyway. Or when he pressed his Justice Department to investigate the election in a related effort to try to overturn a contest he lost. It would be one thing to view these different stories, including last night's New York Times report, under the perspective that Trump had exited the political stage, and excited the political stage as well, never to return again, like Richard Nixon after his resignation. But it's an entirely different thing, they're broad-minded folks at First Read say, entirely different thing to look at them with Trump remaining the de facto leader of the GOP and his party's presidential frontrunner in 2024 if he decides to run again. Because we've yet to have a thorough reckoning of exactly how the former president tried to use his powers. Congress, the ball is in your court. Wow, exciting. By the way, it is an entirely different thing to look at them as with Trump as the de facto leader. It is a different thing to look at them as a pattern. It's also another thing entirely on top of it all to recognize that everything that Trump did here all combined into one unit. Still, just another point on the continuum of Republican governance, as I said, since Nixon, as I tweeted this morning. Also, by the way, since Nixon, since Cheney, in case you are feeling sentimental about Cheney's these days. A brief reminder that that's where it came from. And that the focus of pretty much all of my blogging in 2000, well, really from like 2004 through 2010, with the exception of the time I spent on tracking the nuclear option and filibuster reform, was to remind people that this had been going on in Republican administrations for 40 years. And that Democrats, while they had had relatively, up to that point, relatively good luck in maintaining majorities in Congress, had had a terrible run at capturing the White House. And that Republicans, being executive supremacists when they weren't just simply nihilists, were interested in winning only one election. And even if they didn't win it, they were interested in capturing it nonetheless. They can't win the election by popular vote, but can finagle the election via the Electoral College. Well, then we'll do it. Even if that means calling up my brother in Florida and having them undo Florida so that we can create enough confusion that we can essentially run the prototypical fake news assault. I mean, that's essentially what it was a precursor to the whole thing. Well, they got it wrong, you see. So if they got it wrong, anybody could get it wrong. And I don't know what happened. And it's just so crazy out there. I'm president. Wow. Well, that was a switch. I didn't really see that one coming. But anyway, yes, at the time, once again, back to my visit to the White House, part of the point was, look, we really need to do something about this, and we need to be flexing congressional muscle here. Now that we've got the ability to do it, we should do it. We have to do it. The Republicans are incredibly adept at winning the presidency. You're the president now. Congratulations. It's 2009. You've been elected once. I'm glad he was elected twice. That was good news. And, of course, now we have Joe Biden. And so the numbers are evening out somewhat. But at the time, we were talking about, Nixon being the initiator of this sort of politicization of the Justice Department and taking it to these ends and investigating enemies, et cetera, et cetera. Nixon, Ford sort of only counts as part, ending the Nixon administration. But Nixon, Ford, brief interlude for 4 years as the nation reels in shock from the Nixon abuses. Jimmy Carter, then quickly thrown over the side for 2 terms of Reagan, followed by 1 term of George W. Bush, at which point, you know how George Bushes are with the economy. They destroy him, and so we relieve ourselves of that. Turn to Bill Clinton. 2 terms, good, great, but still brief interlude. Suddenly turned right back to not only to Republicans, but to George Bush again. Another George Bush, 2 terms of that. And, we're talking about a 40-year span in which we have 12 years of Democratic administration. But it's almost exclusively Democratic control of both houses of Congress during most of that time. Which branch should be using its powers and flexing its muscles most aggressively to check Republicans and the way they govern when president? Well, they're not going to do it themselves, and courts can't do it on their own motion, so you really kind of have to be tough about it in Congress. And, ultimately bring perhaps, after their aggressive investigations, some criminal prosecutions. Lay out where the line is. You don't necessarily have to criminally prosecute George W. Bush or Dick Cheney for that matter, but someone somewhere along the line to demarcate between where you're permitted to take things as chief executive and where you would be crossing the line. But of course, again, that's looking backward, can't do it, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, but then realize that the upshot of that is going to be, everyone knows criminal theory, right? A criminal justice theory. With no accountability, there's no reason to expect that the same activity won't continue, right? So anyway, that's what we had to look forward to, and blah, 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 yada, yada, 10, 12, 15 years passed, and then here we are. Okay, just sort of pointing that out. Politicization of the Justice Department. Who ever heard of such a thing? Okay, how about a slightly different angle on things that could give us another theme to look at? We have, of course, just a few minutes left before our top of the hour break, but I think we can start down this path. I think there is a story theme to put together in Republican elections practice, campaign practice, that I don't know, I guess also part of a continuum, something we've seen before, but just the latest examples of how they cheat, essentially, in these elections. Sometimes outright, like by calling the secretaries of state and saying, I just want you to just say that there were 11,870 more votes for me than there really were, so that I can win Georgia and use that as a pivot point to try to win the rest of the states and yada, yada, take over the country. Yada, yada. I just yada, yada a coup. I did. But this on the electoral side, I think, is of some interest. So let's see. I have two separate stories that just sort of illustrate the same thing. We'll start with the Axios one, reported by Lachlan Markay, who tweeted about it just in case we don't get through the full reading. I guess the gist of what he wanted us to hear it came out in the tweet. A week before the first Republican jumped into the Arizona Senate race, he dumped $2 million into an ostensibly nonpartisan voter registration outfit targeting, quote, America First patriots. You see what's going on here? This, by the way, an outgrowth of the Republican gaming of the referees at the IRS those many years ago, when during and after the rise of the Tea Party and under the George W. Bush administration, and continuing on in terms of, beginning before the Tea Party, in the George W. Bush administration, when they politicized everything, including the Justice Department, and then finally after the rise of the Tea Party during the Obama administration, like I said, working the refs so that people came to see the IRS as illegitimate and incapable of making a fair and nonpartisan police work of monitoring nonprofits, and accusing them of targeting conservative-leaning nonprofits for special investigation and inquiry into their nonpartisan status, and made it so uncomfortable that the administration and the IRS, started backing off on those investigations so that they didn't look partisan, and that cleared the way for congressional slashing of the IRS budget, so that if somebody decided that it was a mistake to jump out of the way, they wouldn't have the funds to jump back in anyway. Like, okay, if you're talking about an ostensibly nonpartisan voter registration group that says in its mission statement that they're about targeting America First patriots, and particularly if they then call themselves something like America First Patriots or Tea Party Patriots or something like that, the IRS would ordinarily rightly flag them and question whether or not they were entitled to nonprofit status, and therefore evade taxes and rake in millions of dollars and give it away in grift. But because they spooked the IRS out of it, we now have, years later, stories like this one. So let's read the actual piece itself here in Axios. Arizona Senate candidate poured millions into voter registration group. This is just a way of, cheating in the election and trying to remove your fingerprints from it. Again, Lachlan Markay reporting here. Days before the first Republican candidate jumped into the Arizona Senate race, he poured millions of dollars into an ostensibly nonpartisan voter registration operation affiliated with prominent election fraud conspiracy theorists. In Arizona? I didn't know there were any. The old Axios format here. Here's why it matters. Just say it. GOP candidate Jim Lamon, L-A-M-O-N, Lamon, lame man, I don't know, embraces many of these theories, and a drive to register voters with the same inclination has the potential to benefit his candidacy. Lamon, also stands to get a substantial tax break from his $2 million effort to turn out conservative voters. Again, you see what happens here? So you give $2 million to a nonprofit, and it's nonprofit because the IRS says it's ostensibly nonpartisan, and it only does the good work of voter registration, except it only does that good work for America First Patriots, and that's an obvious red flag, but the IRS, underfunded as it is and gun-shy, will not call them out on it and revoke that nonprofit status. In the meantime, instead of, quote-unquote, self-funding his campaign to the tune of $2 million for voter contact, right? He instead gives the money to a quote-unquote nonprofit that does the exact same work for him, but also gives him $2 million to deduct, in his taxes as a charitable contribution, should he choose to itemize his return, you see. Wow. Next section, what's happening? In late April, Lamon, I wish I knew what it was, a renewable energy executive, sounds like a good thing, right? Announced his donation to the nonprofit Look Ahead America. That's a good sounding, neutral sounding name. That's a good idea. It was designed, though, to help register tens of thousands of new conservative voters. A week later, he officially entered the race to challenge Senator Mark Kelly, a Democrat. Records indicate that he had been laying the groundwork for his run by the time he donated to Look Ahead America. His campaign website's domain was registered in March, and its social media pages were created in April. Look Ahead America is officially a nonpartisan charity that can legally engage in voter registration activities as long as they're not geared toward benefiting a specific candidate or party. But what if it is? Well, then they can do that too. The group said it planned to use his $2 million to register and turn out, quote, America First Patriots, because they wanted to violate the law as hard as they could, as soon as they could. So they did it. Here's the big picture. LAA, Look Ahead America, was formed as a 501c3 nonprofit in 2017, but had its tax-exempt status revoked last year. Wow. For a persistent failure to file annual reports with the IRS. That's another good one too, right? Well, we deny you your nonprofit status because the name of your group is I Love the Tea Party and Hate All Democrats and Want to Execute Barack Obama.com. Right? Okay. Oh, well, good work. You flagged them legit on that one. So we disallow it anyway because reasons. I don't know what it doesn't matter. So now, but of course, a lot of other people were getting flagged for failing to file any of the required reports at the IRS that prove that your activities are in fact in line with the requirements for getting and maintaining nonprofit status. Well, I'm not going to file any of that paperwork. Wow. Then we're going to revoke your status. You're targeting me. How dare you? All right. Here's your status back. So what happened after that? Well, after this, we'll continue with this story and the related story, just to outrage you a little bit further. Then we'll be into our second hour. We may shift gears yet. You never know what's going to happen on this show, because I don't. So, and even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you because that would be violative of something, and then I'd be spied on by the Trump administration. I don't know. All right, welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Catching my wind here. We left off by noting for the record in bullet point form, because we're in Axios here, that the Look Ahead America had said to someone in some form that it planned to use this guy, what's his first name? Who knows? Now I've lost the Jim Lamon. I guess I'm just going to go with that pronunciation. Lamon. Planned to use his $2 million to register and turn out America First Patriots. Now, for the big picture, right, it was a 501c3 nonprofit, but that lost its tax-exempt status last year for a persistent failure to file annual reports with the IRS. LAA Executive Director Matthew Brainard, Braynard, told Axios, AXIOS, in case you're wondering, the group is in the process of reapplying for tax exemption. If it's granted, Lamon's donation to the group will be retroactively tax deductible. So, hey, fingers crossed. We take our nonpartisan obligation extremely seriously, Brainard said in an email, just not seriously enough to file any of the paperwork for it. We do not have any direct contact with Mr. Lamon, just the $2 million, or anyone working with him regarding our activities in Arizona other than sending the reminders for payment to his accountant. It is a monthly commitment. Okay, well, I imagine it's not $2 million a month, but I don't know, an annual thing adding up to $2 million in a year? I don't know. I'd be curious what the details of this are. All right, next up, Between the Lines. Efforts by Brainard's group to root out supposed voter fraud last year were cited in multiple failed lawsuits seeking to overturn election results in states carried by Joe Biden in his matchup with President Trump. That's funny, and it's a great way of putting it, because the president is actually Joe Biden, and maybe you could put things this way, right? Failed lawsuits seeking to overturn election results in states carried by President Joe Biden in his matchup with Donald Trump. Now, he was president at the time, but that's a minor point. But still, honestly, okay, I mean, all references here are to Joe Biden and President Trump. Come on, Axios. Anyway, more bullet points. Ready? The group has turned its attention this year to lobbying state and local governments to abandon contracts with voting machine companies at the center of Trump-backed conspiracy theories about the 2020 election. Lehman has pushed many of the same conspiracy theories. He joined Arizona Republican Party Chair Kelly Ward late last year in unsuccessfully suing to block Biden's victory in the state. Lehman's company donated $300,000 to the Arizona GOP in March as the state party used a Republican-led, quote, audit of the state's 2020 election results to boost its fundraising substantially. So what motivated him to give $300,000 to the Republican Party in Arizona? Not so much that he was thinking of running for Senate, although that probably influenced things, but rather he was moved by their interest in pushing for the fake audit, thanks to the state Senate. So, quite a guy. And look, I guess we can hope that the IRS says, nah, you know what? I think we really probably could just, keep your tax-exempt status from you, after all. And we're not terribly afraid of what the backlash will be, because it'll come regardless. Even if we gave you your status back, you'd still attack us for it, so we might as well keep it from you and keep your tax money as well. Anyway, I just thought I would read you that one alongside this other strange report, this one in The Guardian. Again, not a new practice, just a continuation of old practice. Revealed, right-wing firm posed as leftist group on Facebook to divide Democrats. What a great idea. It works. I mean, right? I saw Oliver Willis commenting on this story. That's how it came to my attention, saying, this always pops up every time this happens, and it happens a lot. It happens repeatedly. I read stories like this and I say, it's weird. Democrats never do anything like this, even though it works. I mean, it can work. It doesn't always work, but it can work very well. I mean, for your evil designs. We're not supposed to want these things to happen. And it's interesting, though, that we take the high road, and maybe the better thing to do. It's just, it's interesting. And meanwhile, nothing stops Republicans from doing this over and over and over again. Julia Carey Wong reporting this story for The Guardian. And I do mean over and over and over. I mean, we've read similar stuff. The Russians were doing it before, and now we're saving the Russians money. The Russians don't have to pay to do this stuff anymore because Republicans will do it instead. All right, here's the story. FEC investigation failed to uncover the link to Rally Forge. Get it? Rally Forge? Like Valley, but Rally. A firm with close ties to Turning Point USA. How interesting. A digital marketing firm closely linked to the pro-Trump youth group Turning Point USA was responsible for a series of deceptive Facebook ads promoting Green Party candidates during the 2018 U.S. midterm elections, The Guardian can reveal. In an apparent attempt to split the Democratic vote in a number of close races, the ads purported to come from an organization called America Progress Now. Not American Progress, just America, like America, comma, what are you doing? Let's have some progress now. APN. And guess what? It used what they're calling socialist memes, maybe, sort of, and rhetoric to urge left-wing voters to support Green Party candidates. Facebook was aware of the true identity of the advertiser, by the way, just in case you were wondering. The conservative marketing firm Rally Forge. Don't go beat them up or anything like that. I'm just saying. And the deceptive nature of the ads. They were also aware of that. Of course, documents seen by The Guardian show, but the company, Facebook, determined that they did not violate its policies. Rally Forge would go on to set up a pro-Trump domestic troll farm for Turning Point Action, a sister organization of Turning Point USA, in 2020, earning a permanent ban from Facebook. So they eventually got around to figuring it out. But important point sort of buried in there. Turning Point USA, you know about. Turning Point Action, something slightly different. And that's usually an indication of somebody who's playing games with the very same issue highlighted in the previous story. Tax-exempt status. 501c3, 501c4. There's also a 501h that has something that bears on similar points about the those set out the rules for the amount of overtly political activity and what kinds of political activity a nonprofit can engage in and still remain nonprofit. 501c3 being the most restrictive, 501c4 somewhat less restricting, but still, relatively tough to deal with. And 501h, I don't know whether anybody really uses 501h at all, but I just learned about it way back when I was learning about the use of these networks of nonprofits. A Newt Gingrich practice from way back in the late 80s through early 90s. But that's sort of where the structure of interlocking nonprofits became professionalized, and people learned the real ins and outs of the 501c as between C3 and C4, and learned to do things like that. So lots of advocacy groups have things like that. You'll know of whatever. NARAL, of course. I don't know whether they really have one, but for instance, NARAL will be, the political, not a nonprofit, but a political organization. But they may also have a NARAL Action Fund or NARAL Social Action Fund or something like that. Sometimes that's their PAC, but sometimes it's also a 501c4 lobbying type organization that raises tax deductible funds from donors and uses it in very circumscribed ways in order to stay within the lines. But you see that a lot. So that's usually a warning sign that you can find it. And if you dig enough, and it doesn't take a lot, that you'll find that's what the activity is there. Turning Point USA, I know them. Turning Point, what did they say? It was Turning Point Action. Yeah, and action is a very frequently used term in naming these things. So a sister organization of Turning Point USA. Money is shuttled back and forth. This one can do this activity, that one can't, and so money, which is fungible, gets moved in between. So really it's the non-eligible entities are benefiting from the tax exemptions just the same, but it's the sort of thing that the IRS tends to overlook. Okay. But Facebook eventually banned them for their activity. That's nice, eventually. There were no policies at Facebook against pretending to be a group that did not exist. That's interesting. They never, one, it's hard to believe that after 2016 they didn't come up with a policy like that. And two, it's hard to believe that they never anticipated this in the first place. But to go back to Facebook's roots, right? They're just like, we just wanted to be able to look at pictures of girls on campus and rate whether they were hot or not. And I didn't really think about people pretending to be a political group that doesn't exist. Even though it must surely have occurred to you that someone would fake being one of the people you were rating on Facebook, either to boost their own ratings or to, to yell at you for doing such a horrible thing, but not be identified in doing so. Anyway, there were no policies at Facebook against pretending to be a group that did not exist, an abuse vector that has also been used by the governments of Honduras and Azerbaijan. Interesting to point the fingers in those directions, said Sophie Zhang, a former Facebook employee and whistleblower who played a small role in the investigation of the Green Party ads. Interesting. I might have thought that pointing the finger at Honduras and Azerbaijan meant you were maybe a Trump sympathetic. Like, I'm not going to point to Russia or China because that's the ones Trump was using, and I don't want to get him in trouble. So Honduras and Azerbaijan. But if she's a whistleblower, I don't know. Not really sure. Maybe that means we should be looking into what Honduras and Azerbaijan has been doing. Anyway, she added, the fact that Rally Forge later went on to conduct coordinated, inauthentic behavior with troll farms reminiscent of Russia should be taken as an indication that Facebook's leniency led to more risk-taking behavior. Well, Mr. President Obama, I just wanted to warn you that your leniency here will lead to more risk-taking behavior, with future Republican presidents. Get out of here, you lazy bum. Now, he was very gracious and everything. He didn't throw me out, and I didn't even criticize me for wearing a tan suit. But he did copy me later on. So that idea he took from me, the idea of saving democracy, no. Yeah, well, look, I was batting 500 for the day. That's not bad, right? Anyway, here are some examples embedded in the story of Facebook posts, I guess, exhibiting these tactics. America, progress now. Let's see. There's if this is our third-party option, why are Americans still voting for corporate-controlled Democrats and Republicans? Michael White, running for governor of Wisconsin, is putting partisanship aside and standing up as an ally for those oppressed by the patriarchy by recognizing his privilege. And there's more, but that's where the thing cuts off. And it's a nice-looking, semi-professional looking thing of a picture of Michael White and a big quote of his blown up and put against a nice blue background. There's one here with AOC's picture in it. We're having a grassroots corporate-free political revolution in the United States is the quote attributed to her. There's the picture of her. The text with the ad says, the meme as they put it, right? The revolution is winning because we are thinking for ourselves. We don't need corporate America. We don't need political parties. We need progress. And we are winning it for ourselves. And then the little rose icon, and I guess that really moved people. Here, the meme stuff falls apart in terms of its professionalism. And they take, what is this? Is this Drake? Is that right? The meme? I don't know. I can't recognize it. I never know any. I know no pop culture stars. But I've seen that meme all over the place of the two shots of the guy and whatever. Anyway, so this is the one of, the holding up the hand and scowling like, no, I don't want any of that. And it's next to capitalism. And then the happy smiling face next to democratic socialism. You got to tell me if I've got my pop stars wrong. I got no idea. I think I once saw the man identified that way, and maybe I misremember it. Anyway, not very good memeing, but there it is. Devin Kearns, a spokesperson for Facebook, said, "We removed Rally Forge from our platforms for violating our policy against coordinated and authentic behavior. Since the 2018 midterms, we have strengthened our policies related to election interference and political ad transparency. We continue working to make political advertising more transparent on our platform, and we welcome updated regulations and help from policymakers as we evolve our policies in this space." The revelation that the ads were linked to a right-wing organization raises questions about the Federal Election Commission's enforcement of campaign finance laws, which it doesn't do. So that's a question I have for them, too. APN and its ads appeared to violate federal laws that require independent expenditures to be filed with the FEC and include proper disclosures on advertisements, as ProPublica and Vice News first reported in 2018, and as the rest of the world learned when the friggin' law was passed. But whatever. The nonpartisan campaign finance watchdog group Campaign Legal Center, CLC, filed a complaint against APN and subsequently sued the agency in an attempt to force it to investigate the group. But in July of 2020, the FEC voted to dismiss allegations that America Progress Now had violated federal law after an individual, Evan Molstein, took responsibility for the ads and attributed the lack of proper disclosures and filings to his, quote, inexperience. Oh, I see. You didn't know what you were doing. Yeah. Inexperience, as you know, is in fact an excuse. So, good. You're off the hook. And, of course, the FEC voted to dismiss allegations because it is deadlocked, tied, and will never reach any conclusion about anything, more or less by design. So that's where we are at the moment. Okay, well, it is illegal to knowingly make false or fraudulent statements to federal agencies, and the FEC appears to have taken Molstein at his word that the ads were a sincere but novice attempt to support Green Party candidates. Well, they really shouldn't have done that, should they? The former FEC Commissioner Anne Ravel, I don't know how I'm pronouncing her, Ravel, she's quite frequently quoted about these things, who reviewed the case at the request of The Guardian, said that were she still on the FEC, she would now refer this stunning case to the Justice Department for investigation. But as you know, tradition dictates that we not investigate. It seems as if it's a clear fraud, Ravel, maybe, said, noting that the FEC General Counsel's office appears to have been misled by Molstein. The requirement for the Justice Department to take on an electoral matter is that it be serious and willful. And clearly, in this case, it was willful, in my opinion. Brendan Fisher, Director of Federal Reform at CLC, said, "This is an example of why disclosure is so important in elections. Swing state voters who saw America Progress Now ads promoting Green Party candidates would have had no idea that they were the handiwork of Republican political operatives. The FEC's job is to enforce the transparency laws and protect voters' rights to know who is trying to influence them. But the agency here failed to conduct even a minimal investigation." On October 27th, 2018, just days before the November 6th election, America Progress Now began running a series of ads that used leftist motifs, such as the red rose emoji and images of Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, to rail against the corporate two-party oligarchy, or as we would say, you should be reading that, the corporate two-party oligarchy. Yeah, all right. We're going to not abandon doing the Bernie Sanders thing today. And the corporate capitalist wage system, by the way. Some of the ads urged voters to choose a third party, but others endorsed Green Party candidates by name, triggering FEC rules for independent expenditures. Following the November 5th publication of a ProPublica Vice News report on the, quote, mysterious group behind the ads, Facebook launched a, quote, high priority, which, by the way, is actually reprinted here as high pri, with little brackets for the rest of the word, ority, high priority, high pri. It's lingo. Launched a high pri escalation to investigate whether they constituted coordinated and authentic behavior, which they have an acronym for, CIB. The name Facebook gives the kind of deceptive tactics that a Russian influence operation used during the 2016 election. The investigation was straightforward, since Facebook has access to information that regular users do not, the names of the people who control Facebook pages. Investigators quickly realized that America Progress Now was administered by three individuals, Jake Hoffman, Connor Clegg, and Colton Duncan. Come on, if you see Colton Duncan is running, I mean, I don't know who Colton Duncan is. Don't get me wrong. I don't recognize the name. I just recognize the signs. Like Colton Duncan. Yeah, he's probably a Green Party advocate. Yeah, bow tie wearing, Turning Point USA, 100%, right? Okay, I'm judging a book by its cover, but in my defense, it is not a good book. Well, anyway, it recognized these three individuals who also served as Facebook administrators for Turning Point USA. So like a data match. Interesting. The right-wing college group founded by Charlie Kirk in 2012. And now he's like 800 years old. Hoffman and Clegg were also administrators for Kirk's own Facebook page. So their names pop up all over the place. These admins are connected to Turning Point USA. One staffer from the Civic Integrity team said, by the way, make me in charge of the civic integrity team at Facebook and give me power. Let me take care of these people for you. I will, yeah, maybe I'll take it seriously. But then again, they probably pay you pretty good. And then they say, well, if you want to continue like getting these big paychecks, don't do anything serious and then I'll lose the job. So maybe spare me the time. Although if I could do the job remotely, anyway. So they noticed, right? This is very inauthentic. I don't know what the policy here is, but this seems very sketchy. I don't know what the policy is. Who said this, by the way? This is it. Again, this is quotes from the Civic Integrity team. One staffer from the Civic Integrity team, according to task management documents seen by The Guardian, internal Facebook documents. These admins are connected to Turning Point USA. This is very inauthentic. I don't know what the policy here is, but this seems very sketchy. I mean, I guess I could work on the Civic Integrity team because I don't need to know the policy. So that's good. Even when I'm working there, I don't need to know the policy. Or maybe, I don't know. Whatever. That just seems like a weird statement to make. Another staffer named Rally Forge as being responsible for the ads. Okay. APN had spent nearly $5,000 to have the ads shown to users nearly 300,000 times, a third staffer noted. A right-wing political marketing firm that ran a $350,000 pro-Trump super PAC in the 2016 election, Rally Forge was founded and run by Hoffman, one of the three names, right? An Arizona Republican who was at the time a member of the town council in Queen Creek, Arizona. In November 2020, Hoffman was elected to serve in the Arizona state legislature. I wonder if he was in the House or in the Senate. They probably would have said Senate. So, all right. Clegg and Duncan were alumni of Texas State University, where they had been elected student body president and vice president, respectively, in 2017. That's a little odd, quite honestly. You know, make some new friends, boys. Clegg was... I love when I enjoy a story live on here. All right, again, Clegg and Duncan were elected president and vice president, respectively, of the student body of Texas State University. I don't know. Does this happen a lot? I always thought it would be hilarious to do something like this at the student government level, but never saw it actually happen. Clegg was impeached and removed from office as student body president at college. Wow. Shortly before his term would have ended in 2018, Duncan resigned from his post in 2017. He appears to have been hired directly by Turning Point USA in 2019. So, by the way, there you go. You got one of them resigned, one of them was impeached, removed from office as student body president, but it's on their resume. You're student body president. Oh, so let me see. Were you totally corrupt or something? You got impeached? Yeah. Welcome to Turning Point USA. That's amazing. The things that keep you out of work elsewhere get you a job at Turning Point USA. How easy is this? Since 2017, Rally Forge has been Turning Point USA's highest compensated independent contractor, paid more than $1.1 million over 2 years, according to the nonprofit's public filings. Turning Point Action, an affiliated organization also founded by Kirk, wink, wink, paid Rally Forge $700,000 for work supporting Trump and opposing Biden during the 2020 presidential campaign, and an additional $400,000 for work on the U.S. Senate runoff races in Georgia. Good job. That's cool. You burned $1 million on that. You lost every single one. Andrew Colvett, a spokesperson for Turning Point USA, said that neither Turning Point USA nor Turning Point Action had, quote, any involvement with America Progress Now or its Facebook ads. Arrest him. He's a liar. In addition to America Progress Now and Turning Point USA, Hoffman, Clegg, and Duncan all also served as administrators for a number of other right-wing Facebook pages. The trio each maintained 2 accounts to administer their Facebook pages, one using their full names and one using their first and middle initials, a violation of the company's policy that each user can only have one Facebook account. How hard is it, by the way, to run database searches every day, every hour for this stuff and say, flag this, and this for further investigation? But did they do it? No. They want money. I understand. Just saying they should do something about it. All right. One of each of the 3 men's accounts had been authorized by Facebook to run political ads, a process that required submitting a government ID to Facebook for verification. One of Hoffman's accounts had spent approximately $650,000 to run Facebook ads on behalf of 40 pages, including the official page of Donald Trump Jr. How interesting, and what a weird affiliation that would raise no flags whatsoever. It's just really quite remarkable. I also think that, is there no data sorting that they can do and say, you know what would really probably be a good place to start? If you can't search every page, you can't use every user and search everybody. I understand. Very time consuming. But how about this? If you spend more than $100,000 in political advertising on Facebook, flag it. Bring me the file. I'll look through it. How many people could there really be doing this? I mean, there could be a lot of accounts doing it, but how many people could actually be behind the accounts, considering what's going on here, right? Only about a third of them are going to have an actual human being behind them that's different. About a third of them will have unique humans. All right. We've started the music about 3 seconds or so late here, so we'll cut out before the usual space in the music and return to this story and maybe one or two other oddballs after this.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with this Guardian article because it seems like a good theme and keeps the number of links low, although actually that's a problem when Scott has to do the summary. He's usually got plenty to say because we've spent 2 hours saying it, and if there aren't enough links, well, okay, we'll try to move on to something else shortly. Where were we here? Yes, Hoffman, one of the three guys, had spent $650,000 to run Facebook ads on behalf of 40 pages, including the official page of Donald Trump Jr., which, again, true. Bring me everyone associated with Donald Trump Jr.'s page and arrest them all. Or look, if you don't think $100,000 is enough, and it really is, because normal people are just not going to spend that amount of money on political ads, or political organizations might do it fairly frequently, and you'll be flagging lots of political organizations, some of which are totally legit. I don't know, raise the number to $500,000. And bring me everybody there. We're still going to net this guy. Hoffman declined to answer detailed questions from The Guardian, including about the nature of Rally Forge's relationship with Molstein. The premise of your question is either ill-informed or intentionally misleading, he said in a statement. Rally Forge is a marketing agency, not a compliance company. Furthermore, it is my understanding, you can see how these guys get fired from things and impeached and and whatnot, junior high school debaters. But furthermore, it is my understanding that the small handful of ads totaling less than $2,500, which qualified as independent expenditures, have been fully disclosed by the responsible organization in coordination with the FEC. Never mind that there was $650,000. Parsing it into small bits gets him off the hook. Duncan said that he had never heard of America Progress Now before the Guardian's inquiries and had zero knowledge or insight into the group. And then he got impeached. When asked about the C.G. Duncan account, which had passed Facebook's verification process and was an administrator of the APN page, he responded, I can't even read it really, honestly. I never heard of America Progress Now. Really? Are you C.G. Duncan? Because you're an administrator of America Progress Now's Facebook page. Well, I urge you to reach out to J.M., that is Hoffman. Let me know what you find out. I'm as curious as you are. Really? Clegg just didn't respond. So, okay, fine. I guess he's innocent. Gee whiz. Despite possessing clear evidence of inauthenticity, Facebook staffers determined the Green Party ads did not violate existing company policies related to political ads or CIB, because they didn't exist at all. They didn't have any, I guess. They decided to deactivate the three men's extra accounts, but after the election, and only after providing them with advance notice. The episode inspired some disquiet among Facebook staff. Here's a quote. "What I find very problematic is that the intention here is clearly to mislead users," said the civic integrity staffer. "The users in question clearly created a new Facebook page to hide their identity, which would be grounds for removal on most surfaces," she added, referring to Facebook's rules requiring people to use their real names on their accounts. And remember, when they required that, everybody was like, wow, what a great leap forward for transparency. Not everybody, like everybody at Facebook. Everywhere elsewhere said, duh. One product manager produced an internal post-mortem of the incident in which she described it as a, quote, crystal clear example of astroturfing. Deceptive campaign tactics, of course, designed to appear as grassroots actions, as well as playing both sides and political ad opacity, since users cannot see who they are. Furthermore, I could see making a case for voter suppression. Well. Unfortunately, it turned out there was nothing we could do against these ads, she added. We ended up only aiming to remove a few duplicate accounts under the fake account policy, but only after proper notice, and I believe we have not removed them yet. Can we strengthen our ads transparency policies so that political ads are indeed transparent to the users? She asked. That would be I feel like a noble use of the transparency policy would be to make things transparent. A Facebook spokesperson said that the company had indeed removed duplicate accounts following the midterms, and that Rally Forge's network of pages and accounts had gone dormant after November 2018. The company made a number of updates to its policies on political ads before the 2020 elections, including requiring advertisers to provide more information about their organizations before being authorized to run ads. It also introduced a new policy to encourage more transparency regarding who runs networks of Facebook pages. Rally Forge reactivated its network of pages and accounts in June 2020, according to Facebook. Why were they allowed to? It established what the Washington Post described as a domestic troll farm in Phoenix, Arizona, that employed teenagers to churn out pro-Trump social media posts, some of which cast doubt on the integrity of the U.S. election system, or falsely charged Democrats with attempting to steal the election. Facebook said that it had detected the operation when Rally Forge began making fake accounts, which were then detected by the company's automated systems and thinly veiled personas to carry out deceptive campaigning. In October 2020, the platform permanently banned Rally Forge and Hoffman for violating its policy against CIB, work that Facebook said the firm had undertaken on behalf of Turning Point USA and another client. A spokesman for Turning Point USA disputed the characterization of the operation as a troll farm and noted that it was a project of Turning Point Action, which is a separate entity. Yeah, sure, totally separate. Why do you even try that? That's so dumb. Facebook, and why do you even do that? Like, if you're going to try that stuff later, why not call it, anything else? Apple Pie USA Action instead. I don't know. Anyway, Facebook did not take any enforcement action against Turning Point USA, Turning Point Action, or Kirk with regard to the Phoenix operation. Facebook also did not disclose Rally Forge's connection to America Progress Now and the deceptive Green Party ads. Why isn't the Green Party suing? Gee whiz, I don't know. In September of 2019, CLC filed a complaint alleging that APN's failure to register with the FEC violated federal law. The FEC responded by sending a letter to inaccurate... I'm just trying to think here. The last mention of the FEC was... Did we mention it in the last story? Or was it just from earlier in this story that we were talking about it? No, there must have been discussion of the FEC and, right, the voter registration group. But once again, the FEC able to do next to nothing here. So again, in September 2019, CLC filed a complaint alleging that APN's failure to register with the FEC violated federal law. The FEC responded by sending a letter to, where? An inaccurate address that America Progress Now had listed on its Facebook page, but it does not appear to have taken further action, prompting CLC to sue it in February of 2020. If nothing is done, the FEC will instead be sending a message that anonymous or fake identities like America Progress Now can pop into existence just prior to an election, exploit lax registration and reporting requirements by digital platforms, spend unlimited sums of money, and then disappear into thin air once an election is over, the group said at the time. And the group was right at the time. And that's exactly what they did, and the FEC did exactly what he said they would do about it. In April 2020, the FEC wrote again, this time to the address listed on an Arizona state business filing for America Progress Now. Oh my, they investigated. On April 15th, 2020, Evan Molstein responded to the FEC by email. Molstein described the lack of filing as an error, writing, "I believe that it is important for the Commission to understand that any potential failure on either of those items is based entirely on my inexperience to the process." He wrote that he had assumed that Facebook's political disclaimer/disclosure was all that was necessary, said his expenditures totaled only $2,467.54, and expressed surprise that a spend as small as this would require any type of reporting. I again offer my sincerest apology for any potential errors in failing to disclose, Molstein wrote. Given the apparent obstacles and unknowns of participating in the election process in this manner, of which I am learning some of now, it is highly unlikely I will ever participate in it again. I feel terrible for having been so ignorant of the process. Molstein also expressed his desire to come into compliance correctly and quickly. At no point in the communication did Molstein disclose that the advertisements had been handled by a major political marketing firm who actually did know all these rules. Molstein's statements to the FEC is extremely misleading and might warrant a criminal investigation, said Fisher of the CLC. Molstein did not respond to multiple attempts to make contact with him. His connection to Rally Forge is not known. He's a resident of Queen Creek, Arizona, the town where Hoffman lives. Come on. The FEC has the power to issue subpoenas and carry out serious investigations, but only after a vote of 4 of its 5 commissioners. In a report dated May 4th, the FEC's general counsel argued that while it appeared that Molstein had violated federal law, the small amount of money involved, and Molstein's nice statement, he's so nice, that he was unlikely to engage in further political spending, it's not won't happen again, this again is now coming up, led it to recommend that the FEC exercise prosecutorial discretion and dismiss the allegations with a warning, stern warning. In July, the FEC voted to follow the general counsel's recommendations and dismiss the case, forestalling any actual investigation. Commissioner James Traynor, remember him? I think we've mentioned his name before, went further, lambasting the CLC in a statement of reasons. He's attacking the CLC, who was asking for an investigation. Contrary to CLC's wild speculation, this case wasn't a fake political group exploiting Facebook rules and hiding spending from the FEC. In fact, APN was established by an unsophisticated individual trying to show his support for several third-party candidates. But he got tripped up by the myriad regulations governing online political speech. Traynor asserted that there was no evidence to contradict Molstein's statement to the FEC and no evidence to support CLC's salacious theories about the unknown person or persons behind APN. They just all live in Queen Creek, Arizona for some reason. It would not be until December 23rd, 2020, 6 months after the FEC had voted not to pursue the allegations of law violations and more than 2 years after the election, that Molstein would provide the FEC with that evidence when he finally registered APN with the FEC and disclosed that the independent expenditure had been made through Rally Forge. The FEC did not respond to questions from The Guardian, citing a policy, not to comment on enforcement matters, even closed ones, I guess. Traynor did not respond to a request for comment. Fisher said, It looks like we were right. The end. That's the actual end of the story. And it has gone no further since then. That's it. So Trey Traynor, believe it or not, a guy named Trey was untrustworthy in all of this. How dare you? Yeah, this is outrageous. 2 years later, oh, by the way, I admit it. Would you like to comment on that? I'm actually gone for the weekend. Sorry. I can't help you. All right. Just wanted to bring that one to your attention. So again, I think interesting link between stories, just showing some odd activities out there on the part of Republicans and their use of the various, what shall we say, different incarnations of the same group, Turning Point USA and Turning Point Action, and benignly named voter registration groups that in exchange for a $2 million donation will target only conservatives somehow for their voter registration. What a world. And we're doing gangbusters. We're going gangbusters on breaking that stuff up. We're going to do great in the next couple elections. It's going to be awesome. All right. Let's see. Other things that I thought I might make. I should make mention of the fact that everybody who is reviewing the now released transcript of Donald McGahn's closed-door testimony before the House Judiciary Committee has basically got nothing to say about it. They're saying essentially, yeah, he came in and reiterated pretty much everything that was reported in the Mueller report and nothing else. And, of course, that shouldn't surprise anybody because apparently the terms of the testimony were explicitly that, one, it would take place behind closed doors, and two, that he would not discuss anything that wasn't already covered in the Mueller report. So I guess that was a, foregone conclusion that we were going to end up with a hearing like that. Okay. Let's see. Other things to follow up on or to introduce before the weekend. Oh, man, there's a lot. One that's like not electoral politics, but I think is really important, but I bet I won't get to. Let's do this instead. I think before we go out for the weekend, we should take note for the record of the work going on up in Boston. The Boston Globe, with a series of editorials under the umbrella title of Future-Proofing the Presidency. Interesting. And it's obviously illustrated with a picture of a ridiculous-looking Donald Trump shot from behind, with rain falling on his head, I guess, during a rally and running off of his duck hair. But the one that caught my attention was the installation. There are, how many of them? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to this point, unless there's another new one. It came after this. The sixth one was the one that was most interesting in its title, The Case for Prosecuting Donald Trump. But let me just note for the record that, again, this is a series of editorials under the umbrella of Future-Proofing the Presidency. The first installation being A Treasure Map for an American Tyrant. Second being Who Owns the President? Third, A Sordid Family Affair. Fourth, Hiding the Evidence. Fifth, Rewards for Doing the President's Bidding. And now this sixth installment, The Case for Prosecuting Donald Trump. That feels like a fun weekend piece, don't you think? Saving American democracy, it begins, for the long run requires a clear condemnation of the Trump presidency. That means making clear that no one is above the law. What a great idea. I wish someone had thought of it in May of 2009 and put on a tan suit and gone to the Obama White House and said it as clearly as that. Because then there would obviously have been action earlier and we could have avoided this whole mess. It's too bad no one did it. Norms in a democracy are only as good as our willingness to enforce them. After the precedent-busting, law-breaking presidency of Donald Trump, Congress needs to pass new laws to constrain future office holders. That's the case the Globe has made in this series. Curbs on the pardon power, safeguards against nepotism, broadening the power of Congress to investigate the president, protections for whistleblowers, requirements that presidents make financial disclosures to root out conflicts of interest. All of that is crucial to protect Americans against a repeat of the last 4 years, or 40, depending on how you look at it. Presidents also need a clear message, one that will echo through history, that breaking the law in the Oval Office will actually be punished. Unfortunately, not a message we're in a position to deliver at the moment, but, maybe in the future. But imposing stricter rules on future presidents by itself is clearly insufficient. Those presidents also need that clear... Oh, okay, this is the poll quote. Okay, those presidents also need a clear message, one that will echo through history by being read twice in 5 minutes. Now I understand their format, and I won't do it again. That breaking the law in the Oval Office will actually be punished. That ethics policies and legal requirements, both the existing ones and those Congress will hopefully enact in the future, are more than just words on paper. Important, because actually George Bush was pretty clear about that. Constitution's just paper. So, anybody who would say that, look out. Trump's presidency didn't just expose glaring legal weaknesses. It also made clear that our institutions are incapable of holding presidents accountable for breaking even our existing laws. Worse, I would add, we've now learned that our institutions are uninterested in holding people accountable because we've never held them accountable before, and we need to be fair across the board. Can't hold anyone accountable if you've never held anyone accountable. If Congress had played the role the founders envisioned, forget that, by removing Trump from the presidency after his criminality became clear in the Ukraine affair, that's late in the game, by the way, that might have been enough of a deterrent to scare future presidents straight. But lawmakers didn't. And worse than that, I would say, it didn't even scare the current president off of screwing around with Ukraine stuff. So, now there is only one way left to restore deterrence and convey to future presidents that the rule of law applies to them. The Justice Department must abandon 2 centuries of tradition by indicting and prosecuting Donald Trump for his conduct in office. That's not a recommendation made lightly. And by the way, it's not even a complete recommendation. They should abandon their centuries or decades of tradition and should have indicted him while in office, because that policy that they had in place was stupid to begin with and was based on a fact pattern that was opposite the one we were dealing with here. But okay, that's not a recommendation made lightly. The long-standing reluctance to prosecute former leaders is based on legitimate concerns about the justice system being used to settle political scores. But filing charges against former leaders is not a radical step either. Foreign democracies, including South Korea, Italy, and France, routinely manage to prosecute crooked former leaders without starting down a slippery slope to authoritarianism. President Nicolas Sarkozy of France was recently found guilty of bribery a decade after his predecessor, Jacques Chirac, was convicted of corruption. France's democracy and its image around the world remain intact. In the cases of Trump, prosecutors would have plenty of potential crimes from which to choose. I think it says in the case of Trump, and I accidentally pluralized it, but I think I'm right. There are several cases. While Trump may be prosecuted for financial crimes he potentially committed before he became president, what is most important to go after are his actions during his time in office, especially those after the 2020 election, which culminated in fomenting a full-on violent assault on American democracy. Hello? First, there are Trump's repeated attempts to obstruct justice, as documented in former Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into the former president's campaign ties to Russia. As Mueller himself points out, while the investigators operated under the guidelines that a sitting president cannot be indicted, a view this editorial board disagrees with, the point of their investigation was to preserve evidence for prosecutors to evaluate after Trump left office. Well, he's left. Second, there are Trump's efforts to overturn the Georgia election results. Trump's call to Georgia's Secretary of State, in which he pressured the secretary to find enough votes to undo his defeat, was clear election interference, which is a violation of state and federal law. That means both Georgia and federal prosecutors can and should investigate the matter further. Third, there's Trump's infamous incitement of insurrection, which he committed on national television. It is a federal crime to incite a riot or insurrection, and though Trump was impeached over this, he was wrongfully acquitted by the Senate, leaving the courts with the responsibility to hold him accountable. Even senators who acquitted him on the incitement charge alluded to the fact that his crime should be dealt with in the criminal justice system. If you believe he committed a crime, he can be prosecuted like any other citizen, said Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, a longtime Trump ally. And depending on how the investigations go, if prosecutors have enough evidence to show that Trump gave aid and comfort to insurrectionists, there's a chance sedition charges could be brought against him, just like the charges his supporters who stormed the Capitol are likely to face. To avoid a potential political tit for tat, and that seems to be a favorite term, the Department of Justice and state prosecutors must remain completely apolitical in their handling of Trump's case. His crime should be investigated independently, and the president should stay 1,000 miles away. Norm Eisen, a former ethics czar in the Obama administration, said in an interview, "That's exactly what President Biden has done so far, and he should continue to separate himself and resist any urge to weigh in one way or the other." Although I think this probably assumed that the Biden Justice Department under Merrick Garland would actually charge someone, and they just might not. I wonder what they think of that. Congress's failure to hold Trump accountable is one reason to break with precedent and prosecute him now. Another, perhaps more obvious reason, is that Trump's misconduct ought to be handled differently because it was different. There's a far stronger case that he committed serious crimes in office than could plausibly be made against even the country's most unethical previous presidents. One of the reasons no president in history has been prosecuted for actions stemming from his presidency is that none of them before the 45th tried to instigate a coup. The reluctance to prosecute presidents is deep-rooted, and extreme caution does make sense. The last thing that the country needs is for Trump to be charged, tried, and then acquitted. But it cannot be the case that there is no line, no hypothetical act of presidential criminality that would not rise to the level of seriousness that merits setting aside our qualms. And if one accepts that there is a line, it's hard to imagine Donald Trump didn't cross it. The events of January 6th and those that led up to them were an extreme abuse of power that few ever imagined a president would commit. A commander-in-chief tried his very best to subvert democracy. He attacked his own country. 5 people died. Allowing him to go unpunished would set a far more dangerous precedent than having Trump stand trial. To reform the presidency so that the last 4 years are never repeated, the country must go beyond passing laws. It must make clear through its actions that no person, not even the president, is above them. Well, that would be nice, but what can you do? It's just a Boston Globe editorial. We'll see whether anything comes of it. It won't be because the Boston Globe asked for it. It certainly was never because I asked for it. Just, interesting and out there. That's what we have time for today in terms of reading through full stories. I do want to mention, I did mention to you that there was something that was not about electoral politics per se, but something perhaps worth your time over the weekend. And why don't I give you I'll give you a thread and an article referenced in that thread that brings up a new topic for us. But, of course, it won't surprise you to find that, say, David Dayen is on this beat. The thread is from a Twitter account which uses the screen name of Cultural Husbandry, but the address of A Philosophe, and that is to say A Philosophae. But I'll give you the link in the summary. A thread about investment groups, like large-scale investment groups, buying up every single family house that they can find, paying, as they claim here, 20 to 50% above asking price and outbidding normal home buyers. They ask, why are corporations, pension funds, and property investment groups buying every house, even in an entire neighborhood, buying them out from under the middle class? What's going on here? Let's take a look. Homes are popping up on listings and going under contract within a few hours. The investment firm and private equity firm BlackRock, among others, buying up thousands of new homes and entire neighborhoods. Of course, you may remember BlackRock, and if you don't, there's some background in the thread here. An example, though, given here: 124 new home neighborhood, whole new neighborhood, bought in its entirety in Texas. Average Americans outbid to the tune of $32 million. Homes sold at an average of 20% above listing. An entire neighborhood now made up of what they call SFRs, single-family rentals. What's going on here? And there's an amazing theory behind it and some amazing reporting in one of the articles cited here in The Atlantic. When Wall Street is your landlord. Essentially, what seems to be the upshot here, the investor groups buying up entire neighborhoods and driving up the home prices to the point where normal home buyers can no longer afford to move into a single-family home through traditional home ownership and mortgage, so they rent it instead, and then they sort of stay perpetual rent serfs to the corporations running the place. And by the way, in some of these stories, we find out good luck trying to get big-time corporation from Wall Street to repair your toilet. They are in the habit, it seems, of simply ignoring those requests and saying, what are you going to do? Move out to another one of our SFRs? Good luck, kid.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Pretty infuriating, no doubt. The West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is next. Justice Putnam will take his crack at the Bar Justice Department story that we covered today. Stay tuned for that. And the GOP is misleading on why homicides are up. Can you believe that? I bet they're doing it for political advantage, too. That and much more. We'll see you next week.